Assalamu alaikum. Hope you all are keeping fine. And I welcome you to my today's discussion on Edward Said's culture and imperialism. You have already known that the book Culture and Imperialism was published in 1993, and the first book, named Orientalism, established the fame of Edward Said. In the book Orientalism, Edward Said showed how the West represented or presented or distorted the East. Edward Said showed that in this book, Orientalism, European writing on India, Africa, on the Caribbean island, or on Australia was actually a part of their effort to rule these distant land and places. Edward Said, in his book Orientalism, also showed the relationship between modern Western metropolis and their overseas territories. In both of the books, Orientalism and Culture and Imperialism, Edward Said put emphasis on culture. And by culture, Edward Said means two things in particular. First, culture refers to art of description, art of representation, and communication. In this sense, culture exists as aesthetic form. Culture exists as aesthetic expression. For example, literary works are cultural productions. Even Edward Said took research work, intellectual writing, as a part of culture. In this book, Culture and Imperialism, Edward Said especially looked at novel as a cultural form. And he showed that novels played an important role in the formation of imperial attitude. He connected novel to the expansion of empire of the British and Britain and France. Edward Said claims that Robinson Crusoe, it is not unnecessary, or it is not without reason, that the hero of Robinson Crusoe is a European person, is a European who owned an non-European land and became a lord of that land. And this novel helps establish a sense of superiority and the rationale for the Europeans to dominate over other lands. So, the travelogues, research work, novels usually help create a narration for the colonizers or imperial powers. Edward Said claims that the battle in imperialism, or the battle in empire, is over land. But who will own the land, who will settle there, or who will continue to rule the land is decided, is contested in narratives. The power to narrate and the power to block other narratives is very important, according to Edward Said, in Culture and Imperialism. This making of discourse through literary productions and intellectual productions create a culture which often help dominate other nations. Edward Said also remembers that the grand narrative of enlightenment and emancipation of the Europeans help the colonized people to rise against colonial rulers. This is the first sense of culture that Edward Said presents before us. That means culture refers to those practices which exist as aesthetic forms in our society. Culture also stands for specialized knowledge. For example, history, historiography, literary history, anthropology. All these specialized knowledge is a part of culture for Edward Said. This is the first meaning of culture. Then, the second meaning of culture. Here, Edward Said takes up the definition of culture from Matthew Arnold. For Matthew Arnold, culture means a society's reservoir for the best, which has been known and taught. Edward Said here links culture with state and nation. And culture differentiates between us and them. For example, when we are a colonized nation, we call ourselves the Indian, and we call the British the British. Both of the identities are based on culture. We, the Indians, fought the British. And in our liberation war, we called ourselves Bengalis, and we fought against the Punjabi. So culture differentiates between us and them. And in culture, in this sense of culture, there involves an amount of xenophobia, dislike for other nations. And this second sense of culture, culture is a protective enclosure where people take refuge, take shelter to have pride and to make their identity. So in the second sense, culture is a protective enclosure from where one derives his identity. And culture is also a battlefield where different causes engage against one another. This is the meaning, second meaning of culture that Edward Said presents before us. In this book, Culture and Imperialism, these two meanings of culture Edward Said employed, Edward Said examined. And Edward Said, in this book, Culture and Imperialism, showed how artistic expressions, how novels in particular, and other writings become a part of imperial process. So, culture is political. Culture can be a combative field. Culture can be a battleground. Culture is a source of identity in the second sense, and culture divides people between us and them. This is the second meaning of culture for Edward Said. And both these senses have been employed in his book, Culture and Identity. This is the definitions, this is the two things of culture. Let's remember again. The first meaning of culture is that culture involves those practices which exist as artistic expression. And in the first sense of culture, culture is relatively autonomous from economy and politics. And it is usually produced for pleasure, but it helps form a discourse of domination, according to Edward Said. And in the first sense of culture, Edward Said examines novel, which for him immensely contribute to the formation of general pattern of imperial relationship. Again, in the second meaning of culture, culture is a source of identity. Culture makes possible the differences between we and they. Culture has an element, in the second sense, culture has an element of xenophobia. That means a people with a particular culture usually have to dislike, have to disfavor other cultures. And in this sense, culture is a battleground. Culture is a combative field. And because of culture and because of cultural identity, sometimes the colonial people make resistance against the colonizers. When the colonizers come, resistance against them also appears on the stage. And in the first book, Orientalism, Edward Said did not touch upon this aspect of resistance against colonialism or imperial adventure. Edward Said shows that the coming of the white always brings forth some sort of resistance. Colonialism and resistance against colonialism always go hand in hand. And in this second sense of culture, it denotes resistance. Basing our identity on culture, we advance ourselves towards resisting the colonizer's culture. All these issues Edward Said will discuss in his magnificent book, in his superb book, Culture and Imperialism. Hope you have understood these two meanings of culture according to Edward Said. Thank you so much for joining me.